It's finally here. Welcome to the Miracle Zone. More than a podcast, this is a sacred space for visionary leaders and heart-centered entrepreneurs who are ready to take off the masks, set aside the roles, and step into the raw, magical truth of what it actually means to lead in these transformational times. More than just building a business and a brand, you know that you're also here to share your medicine, lead a movement, and leave a legacy. If you've been craving next level conversations to get you to your next level, conversations that blend bold leadership, intuitive wisdom, and a touch of the miraculous, then you're in the right place. Because around here, we don't do things in a linear way. Whether you're already running a thriving business, leading a dream team, and impacting millions, or you're still on your way there, here we'll break free from the old ways of doing things and step into a multidimensional way of creating and leadership. Because in the Miracle Zone, we explore the intersection of business, leadership, and frequency. It's where strategy meets soul, and where visionary ideas become reality. And they happen in a snap. I'm Katarina, your host, guide, and bridge between the practical and the mystical in life and business. I'll share insights, channeled guidance, and heart-opening stories from pioneering leaders like you who are living at the edge and reshaping the way that we lead in this new world. So if you're ready to tap into your miracle frequency, to embrace the heart-led leadership that changes everything, then join me. Because this, my love, this is the Miracle Zone. I ask, I see, I know, I trust, I be. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Miracle Zone. And today we are going to talk about activating your pillar and what's keeping you from doing that at your max potential. So come on in, make yourself comfortable, grab a tea, or if you're in peak summertime like me, grab yourself something cold and refreshing and hydrating. It's perfect for this conversation. When we talk about activating our pillar of light, so much of it has to do with this heat, this fire, this energy, this power, this frequency that has us almost overheating. And that's what brings us in many instances to tone it down, to cap it in, to be afraid of overdoing it so that we don't completely overheat. And it's so funny because as I sat down to record this, I had to redo it because of the heat and the computer shutting down. And then there's also some glitching happening in the video. It's like whenever we are at our fullest power, fullest capacity, fullest frequency, it's a lot, right? Because if you're here with me, if you're here in this space, you are a very powerful being of, and your body is a temple of light. And so when it's activated at its fullest potential, whoa, it's a lot. It's a lot. And this is connected to why we might keep ourselves from activating our pillar of light fully. And also in these times, look around in these evolutionary times. This is what we most need to be focused on in ourselves, in our bodies, in our relationships, in our activating that full power in our legacy, because that is what we came here for. We came here for these times and to show up full potency, to deliver on our heart's of contributing to the birthing of the new. Because in case you haven't noticed, and I know you have, we are in times of crumbling of the. And so we need to show up in our fullest more to be stewards of the new. So that's why I'm really on fire, pardon the pun, to really dive into this topic of activating your pillar of. So this is what I want to talk about today. I want to first talk about these two general patterns that in working with my clients, in working with myself as well, of how we are dimming and keeping ourselves from fully activating our pillar of light. So these two broad stroke patterns. And then I want to share with you these top 3 blocks that I see when doing these sessions with my clients. So I have done some pillar of light sessions with my clients last year. I went through a period of doing many of them, and I was fascinated to see what came up as the most common blocks amongst light leaders, amongst these spiritual activists, amongst these magical and very human practical priestesses in this modern time that are a force for this world, that are a force of light, that are a force of change. And still there are these blocks that are really common. So I'm going to share the 3 most common. So I'm going to start first by talking about these 2 patterns that I see that are keeping us from activating our pillar of light fully in these times. So the first thing that's keeping you from activating your pillar of light fully is putting a cap on the amount of light that you are emanating. So think of this. There is a circuit breaker on one of these switch extension cords that keeps it from overcharging and everything from frying when there's too much light pulsing through the system. So just like those circuit breaker switches exist to keep these electronics from exploding if there's an overcurrent, we also create almost a similar effect in our energy body where it's almost like we're putting a circuit breaker switch. Yes, I'm emanating, I'm increasing the potency of my light, I'm increasing the potency of my emanation, I'm increasing the radiance, the luminosity, I'm increasing my expression, I'm increasing my voice and the frequency that I'm putting out in the world. Yes, expanding as we do through the work that we're doing. And then it's like we reach a point where it feels like it's too much. It can feel like it's too much on our nervous system. It can feel like it's too much in our schedule, in our commitments. It's almost like it starts shaking and it's like, oh, can it go anymore? This feels dangerous now. It feels like I might implode. It feels like I just can't contain this much in my system. And so we activate the circuit breaker switch. We put a cap on the amount of light that we are letting into our system. So if you visualize, for example, the light current of light coming in through your crown, maybe that's how you visualize it. Maybe you see it as something plugging into your auric field somewhere. Maybe for you, it feels like this light is coming in from the root, from the earth, from this frequency of Gaia. Wherever you see this plugging in of light coming into your system, your energy body, it's like putting that little circuit breaker switch there. It's like monitoring, like, okay, if it gets too much, cut it off. It's too much because we don't want the system to overload, to implode with too much light coming in and pulsing through the system and causing some sort of circuit explosion. So that's one area that we keep our pillar of light from being fully activated. The second way that I see us keeping our pillar of light from being fully activated is putting a cap on the amount of light that we are emanating out. So the first one that I mentioned is putting a cap on the amount of light that we are letting into our system. The second one is putting a cap on the amount of light we are emanating out into the world. So think of a circuit board that has all of these switches, right? And it's almost like we have a couple of switches turned on, but there's this whole other part of the circuit board where the switches aren't even turned off. they're still turned off. They aren't even turned on. And so we do have our emanation and our frequency and our radiance and our luminosity and our voice and our expression and our power going out into the world. And we've been doing the work and we've been flipping on more switches, but there's still a portion there that we just haven't touched of the whole board. So even though we feel like we're operating at our max potential, max luminosity, max power energetically, and this can show up in how we show up in our humaning and how we show up in our businesses and our leadership, it's still only a small portion of what's available to us on this circuit board here. And although our pillar of light is activated and we may be activating it more and becoming more and more visible and more potent and having more and more gravitas in our presence, it's still not fully quite there because there's a whole other area we haven't even tapped into of our light that we may not even be aware of. And a lot of times this is because there's something keeping us from looking and even noticing there's more switches there. There are things keeping us from flipping those switches up. I don't know. Sometimes I go to my circuit board, like if the power goes out and I go to my circuit board and I know I need to flip some switches back on because they flipped down. Ooh, I don't know what this one is going to do. I don't want to make a mistake. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. So it's quite similar. There can be fears there of, I don't know, if I flip this up, how will people respond? If I flip this up, will it cause negative implications? If I flip this up, will I be too visible? Will people come after me? If I flip this up, will I leave people behind? All of these things associated with being in our full light, being our full brilliance, being in our full luminosity, our full visibility, our full power, right? All of these fears that might come up. And so it's not necessarily us plugging the amount of light we're allowing into our system. It's us putting this cap on the amount of light that we are emanating out. So that's the second area. And these can show up in very different ways in our lives, right? But a lot of times it has to do with these thoughts and these fears and these beliefs that we have, these thought patterns that we have, for example, related to burning out, related to what will happen if we do take on more, or if we do step into a bigger role, or if we do open that second business, right? Related to overextension. Can I even hold this? Does this body have the capacity to hold that? Does this business ecosystem that I have set up, does my team have the capacity to hold this bigger expansion that will happen if I actually flip all these switches up, let all this light in, let all this light out, get this full pillar of light activated? And I know that's going to shift so much in terms of my creator power, in terms of my visibility. And then so we start having these hesitations, right? And so that's how it shows up more practically in our leadership, in our businesses, and also in our lives, is we start having these thought patterns or fears that come up about, okay, what if? Now, this is speaking more generically to the two ways of keeping our pillar of light from being activated, these kind of two pathways, which is blocking the light coming in and blocking the light coming out. And some people are really great at letting the light come in, but then it's really stuck in there and it's not emanating out. And other people are really great at the emanation part, but there's still a plug that's not letting the light in. So we can only emanate so much out because the input isn't fully clear. So what happens is we want to be stepping into our next level of emanating light. But what's actually happening subconsciously and also in our nervous system is we're actually bracing for impact by having these thoughts, having these fears, having these concerns of what if, and I'm not sure. And it's like avoiding what could happen if we fully release, if we fully say yes, if we fully allow, if we fully radiate, right? Can you feel just the energy of that? I'm like breaking a little bit of sweat over here. Woo! It gets hot when we really let the energy flow, when we allow ourselves to create at the speed of light, to create really plugged in to source and to the capacity that we are able to when we align with our highest timeline and our highest creator power. So those are the two general patterns or pathways that I see where the kinks can happen in this cycle of the light flowing freely when we have our pillar of light activated. And I really like to think of it as it's like our central channel. And so it can be more constricted or it can be wider and allow more of that current to run through. And so we can constrict in those two ways. What I want to jump into just to pull that apart a little bit more is share some examples of blocks that I've seen. And I want to share the top 3 blocks that I've seen in working with clients on activating their pillar. And what I found there, just from client sessions, what has been most common across the board, there were 3 that were really clearly the ones that were keeping us, especially working with women, from fully being in our full activation of our pillar of light. And so the first one I want to share about, the first block that I see is the most common block keeping us from being in our full activation of our pillar of light are blocks related to the throat space. So the throat is where the inner light, the inner world of creation is coming into contact with the outer world. So it's a very clear channel of creation, right? And so it can be this gateway between the inner and the outer and the manifestation and the creation. It's where the etheric becomes form in the 3D. As women, it's not surprising that we have a lot going on in our throats because of these centuries of suppression of the feminine voice, of the feminine expression, of us having to sit down and be quiet and be nice and be well behaved and not cause too much of a kerfuffle. Right? Since we're little, that's what we are conditioned into. So there's the conditioning. Since we have been around for a while in our ancestry, in our lineages, there's also been this legacy of suppression of the feminine voice of our mothers and our grandmothers and our great grandmothers that lives on in our bodies, in our cellular memory. Just like our experiences from past lives, those memories of being burned and suffocated and all of that. Oh, my cat has just joined me. Thank you for joining me. And so we haven't forgotten that still lives in our system. And if you've been doing this work of healing and elevation for a while, and if you're a healer yourself and do this work with others, you know this very well, how viscerally this lives in our bodies and in every cell of our beings, this tension in our throat. And when I do the pillar of light scans, I'm very clairsentient, right? So I feel it, and sometimes it feels like a choking. Sometimes it feels like a lump in the throat. Sometimes it feels like a burning in the throat. Sometimes it's calling into mind visions of burnings and beheadings. And there's so much violence and abuse living in this space, both this very, very obvious from past lives of being persecuted, as well as in this current life of, in some cases, yes, it's abuse for some women, but also there's the more subtle abuses that we don't see, all of that conditioning that keeps our voice closed. And so when this section has so much contraction, of course, when we're talking about that pillar of light, there isn't that clear channel right there because there's that kink in this area and this block in this area. And this really was the number one thing that I see as I do pillar of light scans, as I work with clients on activating their pillar of light. It's the rare person that I work with who doesn't have something going on here. And it's so important to do this work of clearing this in activating the pillar of light, because most of those that I work with are leaders, are creators. And it's really hard to be in your power as a leader and as a creator and as somebody who is a CEO and as somebody who has a message and a movement that you're leading without being able to express and to manifest and to create, because this is a center where the creation becomes actual form and not just some vision out into the world or some untapped energy down in our lower energy centers, but where it actually becomes manifest in the world. The second most common thing that I see when I do pillar of light scans and look for blocks in clients, in the leaders that I work with, is this area in the back of the heart, just between the shoulders. And sometimes it's more of the back left chamber of the heart. Sometimes it's the back right chamber of the heart. Sometimes it's right in the middle, or it's both, but it's this contraction right in the back. And this is a few things. So one thing that comes up when I tap into this space is really grief. And so there's just so much unprocessed grief there from some of the things that I mentioned when I talked about the first block, but just also related to our feminine nature, our feeling nature, our sensitive nature, our empathic nature, and also just us living in a world where there aren't containers for us to process this grief. There's no structures for us to process this grief. And so we don't come together anymore as communities, as circles, as leaders to work through all of the grief that is in our system. It's really hard, unless you're spiritual and emotional bypassing right now, to not look around at the world and feel some sense of grief. There's personal grief happening in all of our lives in some way, shape, or form at some point in time that also needs to be processed. And there's the collective grief of what's happening in these times of crumbling. There are people suffering. Sometimes it's us. Sometimes it's our family. Sometimes it's our country, men and women and beings that are suffering. And sometimes we just feel it in the collective consciousness. And the grief is really one of those that there's really such few places for us to process. And it really sits, grief is very connected to the lungs, but also in this back chamber of our heart, where even if we do a lot of emotional processing work, it's still really hard to just get in that little corner where it likes to hide. Because when we get in that place, it's so vulnerable, and it takes a lot of work to really get to a place where we feel safe and held enough to really allow ourselves to go there. This is also the place where a lot of our shadows and just unlovable parts of us reside in our hearts. So we can be doing all this beautiful work to open our hearts, to be in this space of openness and connection and love, and to lead from this space. But there's always that inner critic voice, and there's always that inner child that feels unloved. And it's like this little back corner of the heart of what we don't even see, of the ways that we hate on ourselves still, that we still haven't seen are needing our love. And so that is still there. And again, when there's that contraction there, it's really difficult when we're thinking about our pillar of light. There's going to be a kink there in the pillar of this contraction, especially in the heart space, which is the ultimate center of power of our energy field. That's really creating that pulse in our auric field, right? There's the lower centers of power, there's the higher centers of power, and it's all flowing through the heart and energizing our field out. The last thing I want to say about this center and this blockage in our heart space is it's also very connected to grief and remembrance, grief associated with remembrance. So I remember one time I was getting a massage done and the body worker was working on this specific point of my body, this back chamber of the heart. I had so much tension there. And as I was laying on this massage chair where she was doing this work, I remember all of a sudden my head was in the hole, the hole when you're doing a massage and you stick your head in the hole there. My head was in the hole and all of a sudden it was like all of these tears just started flowing. I was just crying into this abysmal hole of the massage table. And I was crying and crying and crying and the tears were flowing. And the thought was coming into my mind was, I miss my wings. I miss my wings. And it was like this grief associated with that remembrance of my divine nature, of my angelic nature. And what we lose when we come into this human form and forget, right? We forget about who we really are and where we really come from. And this beauty and this bliss and this freedom and this liberation of being in our divine angelic state, which is difficult to access as humans sometimes. And so there is that deep existential grief there as well of, I forgot, and I so want to remember and reconnect with that divine nature of mine. The third most common block I see keeping us from activating our pillar of light fully is in the sacral space. And in this energy center, what I get specifically, so there can be a lot of blocks here, but the most common one that I'm seeing in the collective when I do these pillar of light scans and when we work on activating our pillar of light is what I call being pregnant with possibility. So when I tap into this, in my clairsentience, what I feel when I'm working with clients is this, I'm pregnant. And sometimes it's like a little pregnant. Sometimes it's I'm super pregnant. I'm way overdue. But the interesting thing is the feeling of I am pregnant, but with possibility. I don't even know what it is. I have this baby that I am ready to deliver. And it's very much connected to what our legacy is here or what our next level is in our business or in how we serve in the world, in our legacy mission. There is something here that I am coming to birth or that I'm birthing next, and I have no idea what it is, but it's just like right there and it's coming out and there's so much concentration of life force here, but it's not quite there and we're not really clear about what it is, or we're not quite ready to put it out, or maybe we have some fears related to what it will look like or will expect from us, or what it will require of us to birth this next level of our vision into the world. Just like when we are pregnant and we're really getting to the point where it's time to give birth, this fear can come up of, oh my God, can I actually deliver this baby? Can my physical body handle it? Can my life handle it? Whether it's your first one, you don't know what to expect, or you have a couple and you're like, whoa, I don't know if I have the capacity to bring another creation into the world because I know too much, right? And so all of these doubts and fears start coming up. And so that also causes contraction and congestion in this space. right? Until we actually go into the contractions and into the labor of putting this out in the world, it's a lot of tension, and it's a lot of energy being directed into this space. And so to give you an example, I myself was dealing with this block for 3 years, and I just knew there was something coming. I had no idea what it was, but it was just consuming so much of my energy and so much of my attention. I had to have so much patience, but also do a lot of work to unblock and to get comfortable bringing this into the world. And this is what eventually led to me releasing my music and creating my music. I had no idea that's what was going to come out. I was not a musician, but I just felt this thing coming out, and I had to do the work of being able to say yes and allowing it to be birthed into the world, even though it made no sense, even though I didn't know if I could do it, even though I didn't know anything about music or what it even meant to bring music into the world. But there was a lot of energy building up until that actually was birthed into the world. And it did cause a lot of physiological dysregulation. It affected my moon cycle. I had a kidney stone as well. So there was a lot physiologically that also was happening. And that's what can happen when we're actually experiencing these blocks to activating our pillar of light in the body. There's a lot that can happen around the first area that I mentioned, the throat and our voices. I can say this year, I know I've been working on this a lot because I have lost my voice 3 times already this year. If you've been listening to this podcast, you will have heard some croaky episodes, and I can just feel there's activation there. And I also had a week where I threw out my neck and it was just on fire. And obviously there's the physiological reasons for why that happened, but it was also such an activation in clearing and purification of the space. Obviously, when there's heart, there can be things happening there as well physiologically. And then if it's sacral things going on, there can also be a lot happening physiologically. And these can be little hints as to where these blocks might be for you. So I'm going to pause there and just invite you to really reflect on these 2 bigger picture pathways that we can block in letting light in, or also emanating light out, that can block us from fully activating our pillar of light. And reflecting also on these 3 most common blocks that I've shared to activating your pillar of light, and whether one of these feels true for you in this moment. Using the physiology that I mentioned as a hint, but also just reflecting on what's coming up for you in terms of things that are keeping you from emanating your light out and bringing your legacy out into the next level, bringing your expression out into the next level, bringing your power out into the next level, into the world. Because I know you feel that in these times, there is a deeper calling for more from you in terms of how you lead in this world, more from you in terms of how you are making an impact through your business, more about how you are standing as an evolutionary and revolutionary in these times, as a vessel of light, as an activator of change. There is more being asked of you. We are all pregnant with possibility right now. And so I really want you to take advantage of this time to really tune into what that might be for you and if there are any blocks there. And also, I'm really excited to announce that I've opened enrollment for Pillar of Light, which is my miracle mind, where we journey together as a small group to do this work of activating our pillar of light, of uncovering what some of these subconscious blocks are, what some of these ancestral blocks are, what some of these past life blocks are. And then we lift up the carpet. Once we think we've addressed everything, we lift up the carpet and check even more deeply for what some of the shadows are that are keeping us from fully being in our light and doing the work of integrating them. And then once we've done all of this clearing of our channel and working with the shadows, then we do the work of switching on the pillar of light. And I have this 3-part get lit process that we go through to activating our pillar of light. And there's some activations and initiations that we do related to that. And so if you want to check that out, it's in the links below. I would love to have you join me for Pillar of Light for this Miracle Mind, which is part mastermind. And I've been doing masterminds for over 10 years now. Part mastermind, but also part miracle vortex. And so just feel into what that feels like for you. And I would love to have you join us. All right, my love, I will see you next time. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to the Miracle Zone. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a transmission. And if today's episode and conversation resonated, leave a review and share it with a fellow visionary leader. In the links, you can access my free Miracle Business Blueprint, the 7-part framework I use with my clients to create a thriving, scalable, and self-sustaining business that gives you more freedom, not less. Plus, you'll receive a guided process to identify where to focus first so you can spend more time leading in your miracle zone right away. Let's build the new as a collective for the collective. Together, we're not just creating miracles, we're living them. Until next time, stay in the miracle zone.